to you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning. In today's Gospel reading, you see Jesus calling Peter and Andrew to become his disciples. Jesus is calling Peter and Andrew to discipleship. But what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? When we think about the idea of discipleship, we tend to think that it means that a disciple is somebody who studies the teachings that somebody else gave. A disciple sits at the feet of their teacher and listens to what they have to say. The disciple studies their words, studies their teachings. But in the case of Christ and of his disciples, being a disciple means something more significant than that. Because a disciple of Jesus Christ is a person who doesn't just listen to what Jesus has to say, but a disciple of Jesus is a person who tries to change their whole way of living because of what Jesus has given them. And so what does it mean for a Christian to be a disciple of Jesus? Before anything else, a disciple of Jesus is a person who tries their hardest to love God and to love their neighbor. When Jesus was asked, "What are the greatest of the commandments?" his answer was the first one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And he said the second one is like it. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. The whole Christian life is summed up in those two commandments. But there's a problem here. Because although those commandments sound easy, they're not. And anybody who has put sincere effort into trying to love their neighbor has found that loving your fellow human being can be one of the most difficult things there is. How am I supposed to love my neighbor when my neighbor is always offending me, is always hurting me, is always doing things that I don't like? How am I supposed to love my neighbor when I don't share anything in common maybe with my neighbor? How am I supposed to love my neighbor when I can't even stand being around them sometimes? And by neighbor here, of course, we don't mean the person who lives next door to you. Your neighbor is whoever God puts in your path today. That's who you're called to love. So loving your neighbor is very, very hard work. When Jesus Christ calls Andrew and Peter to discipleship, he does it in a very peculiar way. He sees them on the Sea of Galilee, and they're fishermen. They're out on the Sea of Galilee, throwing their nets into the sea and fishing. When we think of fishing, fishing is mostly a hobby, a pastime. But for them, it was their livelihood. For Andrew and Peter, fishing was how they put food on the table. Not just the fish they caught, but this was their job, this was their work, this was their life. Jesus sees them doing this, and he says, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." We're used to seeing the translation that says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." But more literally, the Greek translates as, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." Come after me has that sense of seeking after Jesus, looking for Jesus. Not just a sense of walking behind him, but of trying to find him, searching for him with all your heart. Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men. Jesus takes that call to discipleship, and he puts it in those terms that are so crucial, so relatable to Andrew and to Peter. So if being a disciple of Jesus means loving your neighbor, and if being a disciple of Jesus means being a fisher of men, maybe we can solve the problem of how difficult it is to love your neighbor if we look at what it is to fish. It's kind of appropriate on Father's Day to have a gospel reading about fishing, isn't it? And in fact, I'm planning on taking my son fishing later today. My son and I have taken up fishing over the past few months, and we've been enjoying it a lot. And I grew up fishing as well. What I've learned about fishing is that there are three things that you have to be willing to be good at, to get good at, to practice, in order to be good at fishing. The first one is patience. There are many days when you go fishing and the fish just aren't biting that day. And you have to try time and time again until you're finally able to catch something and to reel something in. To be a good fisherman, you have to be willing to wait, to be patient, to trust that the fish are going to bite at some point, even if it's not right now. The second virtue that you need to have to be a good fisherman is discernment. Because a fisherman needs to know what kind of bait to use for each kind of fish, and what technique to use in each situation. Each lake, sometimes the fish are used to eating something different, and so they're going to respond differently to a different bait. And the third virtue that a good fisherman needs is the virtue of presence. What do I mean by that? I mean, you cannot catch any fish if you're not willing to pull yourself out of bed in the morning, get your stuff together, and get out to the lake. To be a good fisherman, you have to show up. You have to be willing to be there, even when it's not comfortable. I remember when I was a kid, my dad would take me fishing sometimes, and we would have to get up at least what I considered as a child, very obscene early hours of the morning. And I wasn't always a big fan of dragging myself out of bed that early. And yet that's what you have to do in order to catch the fish. So now, what are the three virtues that you need to have in order to love your neighbor? If you want to be a disciple of Christ and to put that commandment to love your neighbor into action, first of all, you need to have patience. There are days when we don't particularly want to love our neighbor. There are days when we look at the person we encounter, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's on the road as we're driving, whether it's here in church, whatever it might be. We look at that person and we say, I don't particularly want to try to love you today, because you're really getting on my nerves today. But loving your neighbor means that you have to be able to work through those times when you don't want to do that. You have to be able to force yourself. You have to be able to put in that effort. to trust that maybe this person is not rubbing me right today, but that does not mean that they have no value. That does not mean that they don't belong here as much as I do. The second virtue that you need to have in order to love your neighbor is discernment. Just like the fisherman who needs to know which kind of bait to use in which scenario. To love your neighbor, you have to know, what does my neighbor need today from me? What kind of love am I called to show my neighbor today? You know, there's the idea of tough love. Sometimes we feel I'm called to give this person tough love. And there are scenarios like that, although I think they're fewer than we tend to think they are. But there are different kinds of love, and if I show my neighbor the wrong kind of love, the kind of love that they don't need today, that can do more harm than good. And so we have to be able to look and to see, where is my neighbor at today? Where is this person who I'm encountering? What do they need from me? And we have to be willing to respond to that need that we see in them out of our love for them. And of course, the third virtue that we need to have in order to love our neighbor, we have to show up. We have to be present with them. You cannot love anyone from a distance. In order to love your neighbor, you have to be willing to be with them, to sit with them, with all of their warts, with all of the things about them that make you uncomfortable, that you don't necessarily like. If you're going to love that person, there's the need for that face-to-face encounter. You know, the face is so crucial to who we are as human beings. When you look into a person's face and into their eyes, you see so much about them that you never see if the only interaction you ever have with this person is on the internet or over the phone. To be willing to sit with a person face to face means to be willing to enter into dialogue with that person. And if you look at that word dialogue, you'll see how crucial it is to us as Christians. What does that word dialogue mean? Via logos. Dialogue is when we are willing to sit down with a person and let the logos, the Word of God, flow between us. When we're willing to sit face to face and share an encounter with our fellow human being that's based on a shared recognition of the image of God in each of us. That is what dialogue is. And so in order to love your neighbor, you have to be willing to be present with them and to be present to God. So that when you sit down with your neighbor, whenever you're having that kind of conversation, that dialogue, it's actually a trialogue. It's not a dialogue at all. There's never just me and you. There's always me and you and Jesus Christ between us. If we're willing to see that, if we're willing to experience the presence of God in our neighbor. And so Jesus Christ has now called Andrew and Peter to be his disciples. He has called them to come after him, to follow him, to learn from him, but to put in practice the things that they have learned. Each of us is also called to become a disciple of Christ by loving God, first of all, and by loving our neighbor And we can become better at loving our neighbor when we put those three virtues into practice: patience, discernment, and presence. We can practice those virtues. If we can work on those three things, then we also, just like Andrew and Peter, can follow after Jesus and become, along with them, fishers of men. Amen.